But it's time to start with this fireside chat with Eric. So I'll invite Eric on stage. Hi, Eric. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really glad to have you. You 2 weeks ago, you made no, 3 weeks ago, I think, a nice article about on the news stack about the latest API Days conferences you attended in New York, and yes, we had some discussion about the latest trend, and yes, we said we should talk about the what's happening in this industry, and with your overview, your experience on the field, you can really help people navigate into that industry. So maybe
really happy to be here. I've been involved in one way or another with APIs now. I'm just checking. It's looking like about 20 years since I got started with the original SOAP spec back at W3C. I was on the Web Services Architecture Committee for a while. We wrote an architecture spec, but we had so much controversy. Even the beginning when the SOAP spec was submitted, we had this huge debate between those who were doing document-oriented RESTful services and those who wanted to do RPC type SOAP services. And so we pushed on SOAP for many years, and it looked like it was going down the proprietary route with the vendors in control, and Java vendors were putting it into Java EE and Microsoft was putting it into .NET. So you were producing web services from these proprietary tools instead of having them be standards themselves. And I talked to Tim Berners-Lee about this once at one of the W3C events, and he sponsored a workshop where we had it out across the entire community, web services versus REST. And as we know now, REST has really succeeded and become the ubiquitous standard, and web services and SOAP and WSDL are kind of legacy. And it's really fascinating to see where it's going to go from here. I think the standardization is really good for the industry, and the fact that APIs have a standard base in REST and other protocols now is leading to their ubiquitous adoption. We see them everywhere. I learned a lot at the last API Days conference. I love these conferences. And among the things, that was very obvious was the huge uptake of APIs across the board, internally in companies. I had used them. I was the first one to put a RESTful service in production at Credit Suisse when I was there. I championed them at Citi when I was there. And at WSO2, most recently, I had a chance to provide some technology leadership and vision to the API area for that company. And it's just fascinating to see how things are going and where they're going to go from here, from that kind of long ago beginning. One other just brief thing to add for you. The whole idea of the gateway started back in the web services days with Data Power Appliance. This was for WS security. And now, of course, it's expanded to not just to use web services, but REST, and not just security, but rate limiting and throttling and monetization. And all of these things were added to it, and it became so heavyweight, trying to keep up with all the use and all the different applications and all the protocols and all the things that people need to do with APIs, that now we're seeing the trend toward, as we talked about in the last API Days, and it was in the article, commoditization of the gateway and the disaggregation of the functions the gateway used to provide. And we're seeing a lot of innovation and small vendors coming up, specializing in different areas of the stack now.
Yeah, it's true. I've been in this industry only for 10 years, so I don't have the same experience as you. But 10 years ago, we were discussing about the gateway a lot, like what the size of the gateway, what the gateway should do. It should be just a path through, or do we still have some business logic that still needs to go through the gateway? We were coming back from the ESBs. It was the gateway was really a topic, and now it seems like it's a commodity. Now the question is more the management aspect, more the analytics, the governance. The gateway is a commodity. Many open source gateways have been around. So yeah, how did you see that trend coming?
One of the most interesting things when I was talking with some of the vendors at the last conference, they're all talking about raising up the visibility of what's going on with APIs to the business level. And this is very, very important because companies investing a lot in APIs, how do they know their investments are returning the value that they want? I'll give you a very simple example. My son is actually working on API integration for an insurance company. And he told me, Dad, some of these third-party APIs are very easy to consume. I get them into my application, no problem. I get support. I have questions. There's people there. They make it easy. Other companies, they just kind of throw something out there. They don't know what it is. There's no support. I can't get it to work. So it's against the wishes or the interests of the company to put out something that can't be easily consumed. So companies have to pay attention to this, and a lot of the new analytics tools and the new mocking and testing tools are really working at this level to try to make a good user experience. They can tell you how many clicks does it take to integrate an API with your application? What was the journey on that website? What's the feedback? What's the usage? How's the time from getting it there to getting it used? How can you monetize it? What's the best strategy if you're going to charge for it in bulk or by micro payments? This is the kind of thing that companies really need as they invest more and more in APIs.
So is it because the business has been more involved into API management, let's say, or API strategies, that
Absolutely.
Before it was just an architect discussion, but now
Absolutely.
the business.
Initially, when we were working on this back in my days in financial services, we were doing it primarily for integration internally. We were creating services as the best way to integrate different applications. And then pretty soon, even when I was at Citi, we started to push APIs out for public consumption, and it became in the banking industry. And, this is certainly an area relative to regulation and verticalization that there's a lot of work going on in. But the banks started to understand that they could put APIs out and start to do business with APIs and get business that way. And the business people started to pay attention and say, look, here's another area that's strategic for us because it can bring in money. Now, how do we make sure that we're bringing the right amount of money? How do we make sure we're succeeding in this ecosystem? And it's not as easy as just putting an API out there and hoping somebody will consume it. You can't just say, hey, I put it there, people will come. No, you need to really pay a lot of attention.
Yeah, and totally understand. But the open source, let's say, aspect of it have been really important into this commoditization, into this, like, say, large spread of API gateways. Then on the API management practice on top. So you've been on the managing the program side, with your different at Credit Suisse or Boeing and others. You've been on the vendor side, at WSO2, who is the leader open source management platform. I think the first open source management, one of the first was, it was I just forgot the name, but it was Alcatel. I think they had also something in 2006 or something like that. Maybe
I can't remember either.
Yeah,
so WSO2 was kind of in the middle with the open source API. They started out as I did with web services. That was their original open source web services toolkits. They started 17 years ago in that market and pivoted to API management maybe 8-10 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, and then we see there were some pioneers on open source, and then there are some new players like recent, Tyke, Gravity, Kong. There is also a 3Scale, Red Hat. Also there. So there is this really new trend, and all these new players have actually democratized, let's say, the gateway, the portal, the analytics. So how, to your mind, open source has been a key player into this democratization?
What's really going on now is the move to the cloud is shaking things up. So none of the new open source gateways are based in the cloud. And we're seeing a convergence on the Envoy open source project for Kubernetes as Kubernetes becomes the de facto deployment architecture. So a lot of the vendors you just mentioned are working in that area. And I think this is the big trend to watch, is the convergence of new open source development of API gateways for the cloud converging on Envoy and Kubernetes. And you'll also at the same time have the cloud provider vendors with their own API gateways. And we're going to see an interesting, I guess you could say, maybe struggle or competition in the industry between the API gateways that are provided by the cloud vendors and the API gateways based on the Envoy open source project sponsored by CNCF. Because you have, on the one hand, something tuned specifically for one of the cloud providers, AWS, GCP, Azure, even Oracle coming up. On the other hand, you have the need of multi-cloud capabilities based on the standards such as the Envoy proxy. So this is where open source is coming in right now, I think, most prominently.
Yeah, and also there's maybe the cost associated with that. Of course, the cloud. There is also the fact that, but with open source, you need to know how to manage it. You need to learn the practice. It's not hosted, so this is also where maybe the practice has evolved. At least at the PLS conferences, we've seen so many new architects being promoted, API product managers or developers or business analysts, like being in charge of a whole program. So yes, we definitely have seen.
Yeah, you see recruiting ads on LinkedIn for API project leaders, API managers. Absolutely, it's become a whole business, and I think that's why we're seeing a lot of these trends. And open source remains a foundational part of it. But as you see, also the open source vendors provide managed services. They host it for you in the cloud or on-prem, and they provide some income that way. Or you have the open core vendors with the open source, and they add the enterprise features. And these things are going to continue. But I think the successful vendors are going to be the ones who find the right niche of a problem area that's not solved or solved well in the new world of APIs being a business with product managers and project managers, and APIs becoming products with ROI associated with them. How do you raise this up from speeds and feeds and your load balancing and rating and security policy enforcement up to how well is that API doing as a product? How can we find that out? And these are the kinds of things where if you have an open source base, someone needs to start to add these on top for making more, commercializing those things.
So so if we go back the last 20 years, but so ESBs, web services, then REST, JSON, like new way to build and think APIs, like this. The business get involved the last 10 years, so it moves from just a technical architect discussion to a more, it's a broader business discussion. Then open source comes to the game to democratize it even better. Okay, so now we have this more mature API management industry where the gateway is a commodity. But you mentioned the term like API security, and it's true that the 2.5 years of COVID have obliged companies to open APIs in the wild, enable remote work, connect with each other. But they've done that, in a way that was really not governed. Sometimes it was in a hurry. We have all these shadow APIs out there. So, and we've seen really last year the frenziness of API security. So, to your mind, to your point of view, like, does API security is now really a standalone product that needs standalone tools because the API management industry is not ready yet? Or no, it's just like a trend, and API management vendors, classic vendors, will actually get that into their realm?
It's an interesting area. There's a lot of different aspects of API security, and different vendors tend to focus on different aspects. Something I liked a lot about the last conference, we had a presentation from Mark O'Neill at Gartner, who went over the basic process of API security. So like the OWASP framework, which was also presented, the OWASP API Security Top 10 was discussed at the last conference, which was also very interesting. I did another article about that, how authorization remains the biggest risk for API security. But the process of it, as most security frameworks will start out with, will give you an idea what you need to do to be secure with your APIs, and then you can figure out which tools fit into that process the best way. And it starts by discovering what you have. Going back to my city experience, I was responsible for API security for bot detection for a while. And sometimes we would only find out that we had an attack on an API because somebody had put an API in production without telling us. So we didn't even, and then we would study what are all the APIs, and we had to manual exercise to try to figure out what were all the APIs that were out there, because nobody knew. There was no central point of control. So we see a lot of API security vendors starting with this, and this is the first point of guidance on the OWASP and the Mark O'Neill's process for API security. Find out what you have, and then go through that inventory and check the different aspects of security. There's companies that are focused on the payload security and validating the payload. There's companies that are focused on penetration testing and preventing some break-ins. There's those that are focused on authorization. It's a very important area that's not been solved. Authentication is pretty well solved. You can have an ID for the API. That's ground zero. That's basic blocking and tackling. You need that. But then with the ID, to get the right roles, permissions, and policies associated with it, so that you make sure whoever gets in, if they break in through that API ID, they can't access sensitive data with those credentials. So it's a kind of a list, and some companies are focused on authorization, some are focused on the payload validation, some are focused on encryption, some are focused on authentication. And so it's kind of a long story in a way, because you have a long checklist to make sure everything is secure, and you have different vendors providing different parts of that stack. And this is, I think, in general, what's going on with the new trend is customers are going to have to evaluate the different vendors against the requirements that they have. And with something like API security, you really have to start with the process and all the vulnerabilities that need to be protected against, and figure out which vendors offer which protection.
But that may lead to a lot of fragmentation, like too many tools, too many companies. So vendors will acquire and merge them with their product, don't you think?
Yeah, we're seeing it already. We're seeing many of this, like Okta's acquired a lot, Thales has acquired a lot of companies. There's another API security company that's been trying to acquire everything so they can provide the full solution, including governance, which is another big area I didn't mention. So I think we are seeing this for sure. Classic case, Okta and Auth0, of course, very well known, but there are others. SailPoint, I think, was acquired recently. So yeah, absolutely what's happening.
This is why the evaluation of startups is maybe crazy in that space, because investors know there will be acquisitions. So maybe.
Yeah, that's right. Let's do it. Let's do one, maybe. Let's do a startup.
The business model is to sell the company, not to sell products. So, so again, security. Thank you for sharing your point of view. We see some question in the chat about architecture. It's true that there is another trend we see in the industry, is like the event-driven architecture.
Yes, that's very, very interesting. One of the things I did at Citi was I redesigned the payment processing system from batch-based to event-based. The management called this the non-batch option, which I thought was kind of a funny way to put it. But payment systems still are largely batch-oriented, although it is changing. And I have had heard a very interesting talk from someone at Tesla about how they use events to manage the telemetry from the cars and analyze all the information on the map and from the charging stations to direct people to the right charging stations at the right time. And they put a chain of events together to do this. There's another case study at Walmart that showed how they changed an RPC-based architecture, which was creating a lot of bottlenecks and performance issues, and solved that by an event-based architecture that brought the inventory up asynchronously into a pool where it could be checked very easily, instead of having to do RPC calls to check inventory for all the items. So I think we're seeing a big trend. We're seeing a lot of vendors coming out in the event-driven area. Vendors who have been there for a long time are starting to expose their capabilities more as APIs. We have the async API spec that's come out that's been very helpful to standardize this. Webhooks, server-side events, all of these things are coming out as better ways and better alternatives to do some of the types of activities. They're not going to replace the request response, but they're going to provide a good alternative for some use cases where it's better served. So this is a great trend as well. It's going to cause some challenges for the companies that are doing gateways and management and security, because they have to be multi-protocol and they have to understand events and they have to put these things together. And some of the vendors are starting to do that, but this is very, very important trend too.
But is it because also of the business asking for more real time or for more performance, or like you were mentioning Tesla? Recently, I wanted to connect my bank to another accounting platform, and they were saying, the connection works, but you will have only the results at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning and all the receipt and everything. So that's why it's connected now.
Yeah, banks are still very batch oriented, unfortunately, and that's difficult to change those systems to online. The batch systems have been in place a long time. They're very reliable. Event processing is an alternative for that, which I hope they're going to look into more and more, but I think that's going to take some time.
But I think the customer demand, now with many new digital players, we want things real time. It's normal to have things real time.
I have the feeling that API trend, the API standardization, is really contributing to the advancement of society in a way. I mean, I've gone onto government websites. Recently I got a jury duty notice, and I went onto the government website, and they let me do everything online now to respond to this. And a few years ago, that was not the case. So I do see more and more things moving online, even with government. I see banks becoming better about it, many companies becoming better about it. And I'm a little surprised in some cases how quickly they're able to do it. But I think a lot of it has to do with the API standardization layer and the abstraction layer that APIs provide for being able to do things like this. So yeah, I think the change is starting to accelerate, and you're seeing some banks that are really out ahead of others. I could name Capital One. I'm a Capital One customer, and their credit card processing. You go online to a shopping site, and they find all the discount coupons for you automatically and enter it. Other credit cards companies are not doing that, but they know they need to catch up. So I think we're going to see this.
So we have a question from Olga about it's a question more about RPC, gRPC, SOAP versus REST, whatever the thing. But let's say now we have, so we had a lot of SOAP services. REST came into the game, making it more easy and simpler and lightweight. But now we see we have seen GraphQL coming, for really mobile development and backend for front end. We've seen also RPC and gRPC, for high performance services and microservices. Also, so how do you see things coming? Will we stay with a different, let's say, philosophy, protocols, architectural styles, and we will just use the best one for the best use? Or do you see some will fade, maybe the SOAP will completely fade? I don't know, how do you see that protocol and style competition?
I think SOAP is legacy being replaced over time. Some people are still using it. Of course, things get in production, they get used for a long time. REST, I don't think is going away anytime soon. I think it's still the dominant form of APIs, maybe 85%, I've heard. My mental model about this, I talked years ago with Adrian Cockcroft, who was doing the migration of Netflix from on-prem Java EE monolith to microservices. And I asked him what was his programming model at one point, and he said his idea was they had a kind of a coarse-grained interface into the microservice that was HTTP based. But once they got into the microservice, when they were inside of their own environment, they were using RPCs for finer-grained APIs. So you have kind of this concept of a unit of work that might be represented by a RESTful API. And within that unit of work, you may have need for other calls, other invocations of other services, and those are probably going to be more easily done with RPCs. Generally, I think you're right. It's the right solution for the right requirement. You can't say one size, one ring is going to fit all use cases. And I think there's a place for RPC, there's a place for REST. Historically, the way I look at this, REST came up emerged as HTTP did as a wide area network protocol. If you look at the original REST thesis by Roy Fielding, he talks very specifically about why they engineered HTTP to be suitable for wide area networks of wide area World Wide Web. And they took out something that's essential for the RPC mechanism, which is a shared session state, on purpose for this kind of scalability. RPC, on the other hand, is very intuitive, very easy to use, and it's good for a local area network environment. So I kind of also have this mental model of REST is decoupled, stateless, scalable for a wide area network of the World Wide Web, and that's why it's been so successful. And RPC tends to be a little more restricted for its use in that kind of broad context, but it can be very useful in a local area network. I know these are kind of very oversimplifications, but I think it's illustrative of the point that the right protocol should be used for the right job.
So it's really about the size. Do you want things large scale, a large use, versus something will we stay quite local in terms of usage rates? But sometimes we don't know with these open and public APIs. Actually, we don't something that is really local and should be only used internally, maybe actually extremely useful and asked by a business externally. So this is why we may have seen some issues where we had to put things out that were not ready to be out.
And again, this is why it's so important to get these analytics, to get these the feedback tools, to get all of these items visible at that level of have we done the right thing with the right protocols for the right application? How can we tell what's the feedback, what's the observability, what's the monitoring, what's the analytics that tells me I've made the right choice?
Yeah, but let's say it can contradict at some point, the Jeff Bezos mandate, you should open APIs to the external world as if developer would use it without exception, that
was a fascinating mandate. I worked for a long time with Credit Suisse when I was a CTO at Iona, and then at Credit Suisse after Iona was acquired. One of the largest SOA installations in the world. Gartner used it as their case study for SOA. And the principles of SOA are what's behind microservices as well. It's kind of specialization of it, how you can compose things, break things up, make things reusable, manageable, and so on. And Jeff Bezos mandated that for Amazon, and it's worked out really well for them. And I credit that decision as part of the trend for microservices. I think Netflix experience with it is the other part, where the Netflix was in particular saying, I need to break my problem up so that if I have a failure, it only hits this one area of the problem. And I need to scale up more easily and be more flexible and automated and all these other benefits. But have just Jeff Bezos said that, I think the original reason, if I understand it, he said it was he's trying to get his team to be more productive. He did this study, the pizza team study, that showed teams of 12 or more became less productive because you spent all the time communicating. If you break the problem up with strongly governed interfaces and delegate all the responsibility to a service, to a small team, they can get it done quickly. And you have to have a lot of governance in place for this to make sure that the interfaces don't get changed in a way that breaks somebody else. But if you can set that up, and it's what they've done, it's very fascinating, because that team of 12 is responsible for everything from design through to production. They wear beepers if there's a problem. And I talked with somebody who did development for the Amazon website, and he said, yeah, we had the beepers. If something went wrong with the click now to pay button microservice, they called us and we had to go in. So it's a fascinating model. I think the reason for it primarily is productivity, getting the small teams to be able to work together and plug the results together seamlessly with the APIs. But it's hard to do, especially in a company where I was working. It was used to having monolithic development teams working on a bigger problem.
Yeah, I often say Jeff Bezos has been one of the main API evangelists. Even it was not, I think it was not expecting that to happen. The second one is Steve Jobs with the mobile, the app stores. Like where now with mobile you are obliged to have APIs to connect to the mobile.
Oh yeah, that changed everything.
Yeah, and the third one is Kinlane, the API evangelist with all this content. But this is for me the three top API evangelists, that have pushed many businesses in the world to adopt APIs, not just to adapt to APIs, but to really adopt APIs and the mindset behind that. So, talking about adoption, there's another trend that we're seeing is that you mentioned at the beginning of the chat that actually the business is more involved into the topic, like the KPIs for APIs sometimes, as John Mercer used to mention this. And so there, on one side, there's the lack of developers. On the other side, the business wants to be involved, and this is where we've really seen this no code or low code at least, but mostly no code trend, of course powered by APIs. But it seems now we ask businesses and IT teams to provide APIs in a classic way for developers, but we also ask them to give like widgets or plugins or no code integrations to actually enable the business to stop shadow IT, to stop doing software on hidden software, but actually stay in the realm of IT, but still being able to use the software. So how do you see this no code and the citizen developer, let's say, explosion?
Oh gosh, I think it still has to be something that's coordinated with IT, because there's always this demarcation line between what you can do with no code and low code tools and what you cannot do because of the complexity of the problem. I think people look at the no-code tools, look at the power of assembling with drag and drop and plug and play blocks and pre-built APIs and pre-built connectors and adapters, and that's can provide a lot of value and a lot of help in productivity. But it gets to a certain point where you have maybe a problem that's not solvable this way, and you have to go and get some code done by a developer. Now all of a sudden you're saying, hey, I've done this over here, why isn't it working? And it becomes a problem. But if you had done this development together between shadow IT people and IT, I think this really points to the fact that those barriers need to be broken down. The reason shadow IT often exists in the first place is because of this traditional separation of duties between IT and the business. The business creates the requirements, throws them over to IT. IT brings them back, and business says, "What the hell is this?" oversimplifying, but this often happens that there's not enough communication between the two. And I think if low-code tools are going to succeed, that's the big problem that has to be solved. And I think low-code tools can play a role, and we're seeing more and more of them.
So we have some question about like what do we say by no code? Like the goal is, I don't know if you know application like Zapier, who are able to connect APIs with each other. Airtable, who is able to give a database, simple kind of database for non-developers to use. And so you will be able to connect maybe your email provider with your Dropbox, with your photo provider, or with your CRM, or with your spreadsheet, and you will be able to mix and make them discuss with each other to build full business application without the need of coding, because the software as a service have APIs that can connect with each other and exchange data in a way that you don't need to even do code, but just use like these 3, 4, 5 no-code tools or no-code platforms that connect with each other by APIs, and then you're able to have a full business process as a service without the need of coding. So this is what we say. We talk about really the no-code era. Just to answer to the question in the chat. But Eric, do you see like businesses like really getting let's say business people to be no coder? I don't know how to call them, but like, do you see really a huge trend? I've seen like, for example, trainings like 3 months training to build application with no code and stuff. But do you see that really a large trend, or it's just like it's just how do you say that on some teams in some companies?
Well, I think it's a definite trend, and it comes out of the lack of developer skills. We've been talking about the proliferation and the growth of APIs across all aspects of the industry, and that requires developers. And when we're talking about moving to the cloud and doing a lot of the work there, now you've got a specialized skill set that's required. It's in very short supply. And shadow IT comes up in part because the business has a lot of urgent need to compete on certain fronts, and they can't get enough work from the IT department, they feel, to get it done. So they sponsor their own groups to do things, and I think no code fits in there. I've seen also people in the business side doing AI work and ML work that the IT department hasn't been able to pick up. And I think it has to be put in the context of what somebody's trying to achieve. If they have a business need for a certain type of application, let's say mobile app or a web app, and they find a no-code tool that can really help prototype and help design it effectively to meet the business needs, that's a good use of it. But there'll be other cases where it's maybe not so clear. Someone says, well, I have a workload that can't get done. Let's just get a no-code tool and chop away at this workload. You don't really know if that no-code tool is applicable to what part of the workload, if you're just saying, I need to bring it in for productivity. So I think a lot of companies are adding no-code capability to their tools for the particular problems space that they're in to help with the productivity. So I think underlying this whole thing is the need for better productivity, better levels of abstraction for developers to work. And we're seeing this huge, with ChatGPT, right? The developers are getting ChatGPT to do a bunch of their work. And so I think it's more all about productivity and getting the job done for business than it is about low code per se. Low code is a part of that solution, not the solution only by itself.
Yeah, no code is just one more tool in the toolbox to help organization, adopt digital transformation. But actually, for the last 5 minutes we have, this is actually maybe what I call the bodies trend. So you mentioned ChatGPT, LLMs, artificial intelligence as a way to enable the business and developers to do more, or even business people to do more. But a lot of companies are afraid about, like, of course, the capability, and they don't want to miss it, but they're also afraid about their APIs to connect with these LLMs and with, for example, ChatGPT. So ChatGPT has this plugin capability where you can actually connect your APIs to ChatGPT, so you can ask things to to ChatGPT that will interact with your APIs, like booking a hotel or sending whatever email or calendar things or whatever to your teams. But like, what advice you would give to companies about like getting your API interfaced into LLMs?
Oh gosh, it's a huge area, and I'm not very familiar with it. One of the things I could probably say is if you're doing natural language processing already with some kind of a AI or ML toolkit, consider moving that to ChatGPT, because that's its real strength. It gets the large language models, and it understands the relationship of words to each other and can answer questions based on understanding a conversation of words, but it's mostly processing words. So NLP would be the first place to look for ChatGPT to be applied in the business. But I hear also a lot of my colleagues have successfully used it for coding assignments, creating database schemas, creating database queries, creating GUIs, all these kinds of things. So I think also in the development area, it can be very helpful. In terms of generally what you do with your own data set and ChatGPT and the APIs, that's going to depend on your data. If you're going to successfully train a model, you need a lot of data. I think ChatGPT used trillions of words, synonyms, I forget what they call them, tokens, to train it. And you may have a big enough data set in your company to take advantage of training a model to have become interactive through ChatGPT. And if so, then you can probably get a lot of good benefits there as well across that utilization of that data set. But that's kind of case by case, and I wouldn't have much, more specific advice than that.
Yeah, I just, it's really hard. Things are moving every day, but it's true that if you share your APIs, if you connect your APIs to LLMs, there will be, of course, security concerns, sometimes confidentiality concerns about what stays in or out. There's compliance concerns, like where the LLM is hosted. If it's in the US or in Europe or in another country, are you allowed your data to be hosted in this area? So the privacy concerns and data protection. So they're really, because we see some questions like flowing in the chat about that. So this is why I'm mentioning it. But but API management needs to adapt to this new LLM era, right?
Absolutely, and this is a two-way street. You need APIs into ChatGPT and the data, and you need ChatGPT tools need APIs to get data. So this again is going to drive up the use of APIs considerably and feed into a lot of these trends we've been talking about all morning about how to get the value out of your APIs, out of your data, and how do you know what value you're getting. And this is the area I see most interesting in the trends going on today.
Yeah, I heard a saying recently, and I would love to your point on that. But someone say, 20 years ago, if you were not crawled by Google, you were not existing on the web. If Google is not crawling you with robot.txt, your website is not into the search engine results, so you don't exist, right? On marketing level, right? So he was asking, if your data is not into LLMs, in the next month, you may not exist in the answers of the LLM, right? You may not exist in the answers.
Yeah, it's a similar story, isn't it?
And if like 100 million users in a few months, I don't know when they will reach 1 billion, but if you're whatever ticketing, flight ticketing, whatever API and then service, or if your hotel booking service, or if you don't exist into all these LLMs, you may not be you may lose this channel for your business. So this is why of course I don't think we can recommend people to go there or not. It's their own business decision. But yes, this is what's the challenge. Do you feel the same?
I'm not sure yet. I think it's still early days for that, but certainly does seem as if you need to have a presence on ChatGPT to be visible in the world. It's not just Google anymore. That part for sure seems to have changed completely. In terms of exactly what does it mean for every business, I'm not sure yet.
Perfect, Eric. We just reached the 40 minutes we had together. Really thank you. So we can follow your work at CTO of Intellyx, but also at editor as the news at the news stack, right?
Absolutely. I'll be publishing more articles about APIs and other trends, and you can always find me on LinkedIn and Twitter as well.
Perfect, Eric. It was great to have you. Thank you for your insights and from all your experience on the topic and your overview that young let's say, technical leaders or business leaders can't have, because if you don't have this experience, you can't have this knowledge. So thank you very much, Eric.
I got the white hair right here from all of this. But thank you so much. It's been great to be here. I love the conferences. I'm looking forward to the rest of the day's sessions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eric.
Right. Thank you.